Good evening. You are tuning into AWANI tonight with me, Cynthia Ng. BN and Umno MPs will not support no confidence vote against Prime Minister. And a matter of survival, retailers urge government to ease restrictions on malls. That's coming up. Barisan National lawmakers have promised not to support any motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin should it be brought in the next Parliament sitting. In a collective statement, all BN and UMNO MPs said they support the Yang di-Pertuan Agong's decree for Parliament to reconvene as soon as possible, and that the political temperature needs to be brought down a notch. The statement said the MPs would like to focus on issues faced by the Rakyat arising from the pandemic in the Parliament sitting. Johor ruler Sultan Ibrahim Sultan Iskandar will officiate the next State Assembly sitting on August 12th. In a statement released through the Johor Royal Press Office, Sultan Ibrahim said he hoped the State Assembly would address concerns over the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic.
He urges all state reps to convene in the interests of the people and the state, especially on an action plan to help those impacted by the pandemic and to properly organize the Johor Economic Recovery Plan. The ruler added that he is deeply saddened to see people living in hardship, fear and anxiety, and express his disappointment that the pandemic has yet to be resolved until today. Meanwhile, Negeri Sembilan Menteri Besar Datuk Seri Aminuddin Harun has confirmed the State Legislative Assembly is due to meet in the first week of August after the Yang di-Pertuan Besar Tuanku Muhriz Tuanku Munawir consented to the sitting. Johor is the second state to have fixed a date for its State Assembly sitting on August 12 after the Perlis State Assembly, which will convene on August 24th.
More than a year into the pandemic, retailers are still struggling for survival as malls nationwide are forced to close again as the country goes under full lockdown. The fear is that businesses will soon be forced to shut down for good as economic recovery is nowhere in sight. We speak to President of the Malaysia Shopping Malls Association, Tan Sri Teo Chiang Kok, on the grim reality facing retailers.
The latest Ministry of Health statistics for the period 9th of April to 28th of May shows that only 0.8% of infections were identified as involving the malls and also involving all the shopping areas outside the malls, the shop houses and all those things. There is no index case nor any clusters that came out from the malls. The 0.8% infection are mostly from staff who unfortunately have contacted COVID, was asymptomatic, and were qualified to come to work from the temperature taking and what have you. We are therefore appealing to the government to analyze the infection data from each sector, economic sector, and from each locality, and only impose appropriate restrictions not on a blanket one-size-fits-all sledgehammer approach.
Teo highlights the urgent need for malls to reopen soon to avoid further damage to the retail sector.
The retail industry cannot afford to be locked down for the next 3 months according to the National Recovery Plan. Already today, 30% of the retail staff have been laid off. Some 20% of shops in malls have already closed. If malls are not open immediately, say by end of July, we can foresee another 20 to 30% of the staff will be laid off, and perhaps another 30% of shops may be closed and may be closed permanently.
Tan Sri Teo welcomes the government's initiative to vaccinate 500,000 employees in the retail sector under the Economic Frontliners Vaccination Program. He says that it is imperative that the vaccination exercise for retail employees is expedited to help reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19 in the long run.
When this idea was voted, 65 malls have offered to host these PVV centers. And the fact that there was a lot of spontaneous response from the retailers shows that there is really urgency and need for this vaccination program to be accelerated and most conveniently at the mall itself.
Teo said the malls have also deeply subsidized the program by only charging 50 ringgit for 2 doses per course, as opposed to the real cost of between 100 ringgit and 150 ringgit per person.
The staff of the mall are all frontliners, basically. And if the shoppers interact with our frontliners who have been vaccinated, the shoppers will be also not exposed to any unnecessary risk. So it is important for the frontliners to be vaccinated as soon as possible and reduce the risk to everybody.
The World Bank has lowered Malaysia's GDP growth to 4.5% this year from 6% earlier, amid a resurgence of COVID-19 between April to May. This is on the back of slower pathway towards suppressing the pandemic and a slower than expected vaccine rollout in the country.
According to the World Bank Malaysia Economic Monitor weathering the surge, these latest developments will continue to adversely affect Malaysia's economy in the near term, citing the continuous cycle of on and off, closures and reopenings having a negative spillovers to the economy. Meanwhile, the severity of the current wave has also highlighted concerns regarding the overall capacity of the health system. It said that immediate focus should be on effectively containing the pandemic and saving lives via effective testing and tracing strategy. Meanwhile, the organization also urged the government to provide continued financial support to the poor while raising its statutory debt limit to spend more to help the vulnerable.
We'll take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. With COVID-19 more likely to become an endemic, as mentioned by the World Health Organization, a different approach and thinking may be required to tackle it. We asked Catherine Bennett, public health expert at Deakin University, Melbourne, about safeguarding both lives and livelihoods in our long-term strategy to manage COVID-19.
I think the sense in part of the population is, well, we can just keep doing this forever. And the reality is we can't. And every lockdown is, another blow to the economy, and it's already weakened. So you're just making it worse every time you keep sliding into these new outbreaks, these new response needs, stopping all of your internal domestic travel as well as keeping your international borders closed. So I think we need to both get more precise with the way we intervene to contain the virus. That should get easier again as the vaccine levels start to lift in a community and we are in a safer backdrop. But also we need to be setting targets for the community so they're not just waiting around till next year, but they know that vaccines mean we will open up the borders, and they know when the aim is to have that and when vaccines will be available to everyone in the country. So then the expectation is on them to make the bookings, not just on the government to fix it all.
She added that while many countries are focused on preventing deaths from COVID, there needs to be a wider conversation on the deaths of livelihoods.
I think that's the hard conversation. People aren't going to say any deaths are acceptable, but at the same time we can't maintain what we have. So the conversation needs to shift to how many deaths we can prevent, and to go back to where we started with all of this and say we will put all these things in place, because this temporary measure, which is proving incredibly hard to maintain in all countries that have got to zero, you just cannot hold it unless you are completely closed off from the world. So I think we now have to just focus on doing everything we can to protect and make for a resilient population, particularly with those most at risk of serious illness and death. And that's what focus the conversation on, and not to treat it differently once we get to that point.
Should Malaysia move away from the once popular idea that herd immunity will end the pandemic? Apart from vaccines, what else should we focus on? Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests what we need to do if COVID-19 is endemic. On to international news. India has declared a new COVID variant of concern after nearly 24 cases were detected in 3 states. The variant, identified locally as Delta Plus, was formed due to a mutation of the Delta strain, which is believed to have driven the deadly second wave of infections in the country. Delta Plus, also known as AY1, was elevated from variant of interest to a variant of concern after it was found to be more transmissible, binds more easily to lung cells, and is potentially resistant to monoclonal antibody therapy. The Health Ministry says that the Delta Plus variant, first found in India in April, has been detected in around 40 samples in 3 states, namely Maharashtra, Kerala and Madhya Pradesh. Delta Plus has also been found in 9 other countries: the US, UK, Portugal, Switzerland, Japan, Poland, Nepal, Russia and China. Meanwhile, AstraZeneca cited a study that showed its COVID-19 vaccine is effective against Delta and Kappa variants, which were first identified in India. The study by Oxford University investigated the ability of monoclonal antibodies in blood from recovered people and from those vaccinated to neutralize the Delta and Kappa variants. The study was built on recent analysis by Public Health England, which showed vaccines made by Pfizer and AstraZeneca offered protection of more than 90% against hospitalization from the Delta variant. Australia's largest city, Sydney, reintroduced COVID restrictions today to contain a widening outbreak of the highly infectious Delta variant. Residents of 7 localities in Greater Sydney are no longer allowed to travel outside of the city, while masks are made mandatory indoors again.
The latest cluster has swelled to more than 30 in a week, prompting New Zealand to raise the alert level in its capital, Wellington, over exposure concerns. New Zealand has also halted a quarantine-free travel to New South Wales for at least 3 days. Sydney has stopped short a full lockdown, but there are concerns the highly infectious Delta variant could drive a major outbreak. The first trial under Hong Kong's new national security law began today without a jury, marking a watershed moment for the city's legal traditions. Trial by jury has been a cornerstone of Hong Kong's common law system for 176 years, but the new security law allows for cases to be tried by 3 specially selected judges instead. 24-year-old Tong Yin Kit, the first person to be arrested under Hong Kong security law, pleaded not guilty of inciting secessionism. He allegedly drove his motorbike into a group of police officers while holding a pro-Hong Kong independence flag hours after the new law took effect last year. 2 courts rejected Tong's plea to have the case heard by a jury, which his legal team had argued was a constitutional right, given that he faces a life sentence if convicted. Tong's trial will set the tone for how Hong Kong handles national security offences. So far, more than 100 people have been arrested under the security law. That is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro AWANI app. I'm Cynthia Ng. We'll see you again.